Not only did everyone stick with us during the break, we've added a few more folks. So it's good to see our ranks are growing throughout the morning. So thanks very much to Diane and Eric for kicking us off in such fine fashion. We are now going to turn our attention to Byron Sewell, who is a prolific author and illustrator and studied art at the University of Texas after earning a chemical engineering degree from the University of New Mexico. Through his industrial design work, he traveled around the world where he engaged in Carrollian projects in the UK and South Korea, Australia, and many other places. The Ransom Center houses his first Carroll collection, and a second collection is awaiting a new home. This morning, he's going to recount about a half-century's worth of encounters with famous, infamous, and otherwise notable set of global Carrollians. So please welcome Byron to continue our program.
Okay. The title of my talk is Caution. Lewisgale may be fun, but it is often hopelessly addictive and may even result in your divorce. It happened to me. It happened to you. I have been actively involved with Lewisgale for over 50 years, the last 35 years of which my second and last wife, Victoria. Below are a few of the things that I happened along the way. Some of them are funny, some are just interesting or strange. All are true unless stated otherwise. Number one, if there have been things I have written or drawn that you absolutely hate or detest, there must be at least a few, perhaps many, then you should know that all of these are Martin Gardner's fault. He started my Carroll obsession when I bought a copy of The Annotated Alice to read on a flight to London. I read a bit of it and was hooked. While in London, I got the bright idea, or perhaps a kind of madness struck me, that I should illustrate my own version of The Hunting of the Snark. Keep in mind that at this point, I had not yet gone to art school. I eventually went. So it is a pretty strange book that emerged. Amazingly, or perhaps unfortunately, depending upon your taste and point of view, the first and only edition was eventually published by Ian Hodgkin's private Catalpa Press in the now infamous fold-out concertina binding, more or less 16 feet long when unfolded and stretched out on the floor of your hallway, street, or even backyard for the first fit. Ian told me that I needed some famous Carrollian to write an introduction so that there would be any chance at all for people to actually buy a copy. I didn't yet know any of you, so I couldn't ask you. Otherwise, I might have. The only famous Carrollian name I knew was Martin Gardner, having just finished reading his famous book. I thought that there might be a chance of his publishers forwarding a letter to Gardner. That used to happen in the old days. I don't know about now. So I took a set of snapshots of the drawings and sent them off to my post. I also advised him that I would be unable to pay him anything for doing it. To my shock, he actually agreed and even added a few things like the idea of how to make the baker disappear, some red acetate film as a filter. It was Ian's idea for the concertina 16-foot long fit. About halfway through the production at Ian Catalpa press room, there was a fire that ruined about half of what had already been done. And they had to start it all over. The books were hand-bound. Number two, another not so bright idea I had was to create Alice Wonderland fake postage stamps. One day I was in Ian Hodgkin's Catalpa bookstore when Gerald King happened to walk in. He had just finished his first stamps and had brought along his own stamp volume of all that he had produced to show to Ian. I was stunned when I saw them. I immediately abandoned my own stupid idea. We talked and I asked him if he could make me a copy and I would pay him. He said that he needed a new winter coat and he would do it for 40 pounds and it would take him a month or so. I had expected him to want 1,000 pounds. When he delivered it to me, it was an exact copy in his own hand. He had inscribed me as the Postmaster General of Wonderland. I'm relying on my memory there. That beautiful copy is now at the Ransom Center at the University of Texas in Austin. I turned one of my own postage stamps into an ex libris that I foolishly pasted into some of the rare editions that we had bought, not realizing that we had damaged their value. Since we donated these books, I suppose it doesn't matter now. They just are what they are. Number 3, I honestly don't recall the first time I met August Imholtz Jr., probably at a Lewisgale sliding meeting. I'm pretty sure that it wasn't in a bar. But it seems like he was always there, nearby, not in the bar. He has a brilliant, quirky, witty, and funny mind. Of all my Carrollian friends, he has been one of those who were most fun. At times, he might even be a bit irreverent about our hero, Lewis Carroll. August has the strangest and most bizarre ideas. And like me, he enjoys nothing more than writing things to stir up controversy or just plain funny nonsense. There were odd ideas, from August, including recently a parody of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland with a young Aztec girl as Alice and her scary adventures in the nightmare world of the Aztecs, where the winners of croquet games were the ones who were ritually sacrificed. Out with her heart. That's sort of funny in a bizarre sort of way, I suppose. I tried hard on that one, but I punted. A few relatively nice drawings survive. As hard as I tried, I could not find humor in that violent civilization. The story, as far as I got, was just too depressing. Number 4, August was the person who introduced me to Dr. Victor Fett. He had tried 3 or 4 times to get me to contact Dr. Fett, who teaches biology and genetics at Marshall University in West Virginia. I was also living just down the street from him. Among other things, Dr. Fett, a tenured professor, is one of the world's most famous experts on the subject of scorpions. August assured me that he would like to meet me, since Dr. Fett had seen my drawings of scorpions in one of the illustrations I did for Alicia in the Dreamtime. I was skeptical, but it turned out we became great friends, and we actually co-authored a Carroll book not that long ago. Number 5, the first time I became aware of Andy Malcolm, the famous Canadian Foley artist, was when he kindly sent me a copy of his short story, Sincerely Yours, Film About Lewis Carroll. I eventually met him several times in the Lewis Carroll meetings. It turns out that Andy and I share an affection for Victorian photographs, carte de visite, or however you pronounce that. At one point, I was considering bidding on a very strange one, offered on eBay, that depicted 2 dapperly dressed men with what I assumed was a couple of stuffed alligators. I bid a few times, but lost to the high bidder of about $75, I think, which was a lot of money for me. Somehow, which I can't remember, we were talking about this one day, and I said that it would make a good story. He told me that he had won the one we had both bid on, and that he would give it to me if I would write a story to fit it. That became one of my short stories that Evertype eventually published in one of his books of mine, entitled A Mississippi Snark Hunt. Number 6, my wife, Victoria, and I received an invitation from John Linseth to spend a weekend in his fabulous estate and home in Cleveland, along with Allison and Alan Tannenbaum, to discuss the upcoming 150th anniversary of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I was aware of his major project, Alice in a World of Wonderlands. To celebrate it, I had written a short comic piece about a fictitious Alice in Wonderland edition. John thought it was very funny and was enthusiastic about it, and told me that if I would write a full parody of it, then he would see to it that it got published, and he would include it in his Alice in a World of Wonderland as a joke. He also got in touch with Michael Everson, I didn't know at the time, and told him that I had produced this manuscript, and if he liked it, that John said he wanted him to publish it in one of Evertype's Carroll-themed books. This turned out to be Alapka's Adventures in Goatland. John loved the story, thought it was very funny, and kept his word, including it in Alice in a World of Wonderlands, over the stern objections of some academics who thought it was way not appropriate for this serious bibliography he had just done. But since it was John's book, he was paying for it, and he could hide it, do what he wanted to. He even pinpointed the story's imaginary location on the in paper's maps. I got my nerves up and contacted Mahendra Singh, the famous artist, and asked him if he would provide a few illustrations, in spite of the fact that I could never have afforded them. He read the book and liked it. Turns out he had literally grown up on a goat farm and loved goats. He told me one time in the side that he can draw goats in his mind. He doesn't have to see one. So he generously did them, and he even gave me 2 of the 6 original illustrations to keep. The success of this eventually led to my relationship with Michael Everson, who decided to publish as many of my parodies and stories as he could. I even illustrated a few of his ancient language translations. In return, I did a number of revised genial drawings for other translations to better match the language. Number 7. Like the White Rabbit, Selwyn Goodacre has occasionally been late for something, but most famously for the late issue dates for the first 2 or 3 issues of the Lewis Carroll Society's journal, Jabberwocky. The issue dates number got a bit confused. One of my favorite stories about Selwyn, how much of it's true is not known to me, is that he keeps his collection in their car park, British for garage or garage, as they say. I had a chance to talk to his wife during the Lewis Carroll Society meeting at Austin at the Tannenbaums one time. She is a radical, fearless Christian who literally smuggled Bibles into Eastern Europe during Soviet days at her great peril. She refuses to have Selwyn Carroll collection in the house for religious reasons. She views the whole Carroll thing as a kind of idol worship, and I see her point. My understanding is that she has an, excuse me, the Sander has an old desk in the car park, and he ponders, that's where he ponders Lewis Carroll lore, along with a few other English children's authors that he likes. There is evidently a gap where the desk almost, but not quite, meets the wall behind it. I take other people's words for this, since I have never actually been to his home or surgery, much less to his car park. It is also fairly common knowledge that rare documents and important letters sometimes slip into the gap and get lost for a few months or years before he thinks to move the deck back and see what might have disappeared into its depths. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I once lost my mind and wrote a dull bibliography that I called Much of a Muchness. You may be familiar with it or not. And I supposed that Selwyn might like to have a copy to put in his car park so that he would have something to sit his beer on and not ring the cover of a book of real importance, like a spare copy of the Alice 166. When Muchness was ready to print, I sent notices that it was ready to be ordered to everyone I thought might like to have a copy. I only got 15 orders, and we kept 2 copies for ourselves. I had foolishly imagined that it might sell hundreds of copies. Yeah. Oh well, the months dragged by, and there was no order from Selwyn. So I finally decided that he would probably just didn't want a copy, since it was just a bunch of information about badly produced American pirated editions that didn't even have proper publication dates in them. And he needed the shelf space for important books like Wind in the Pillows. So I sent the book to the printer binder, and when they were ready, and I mailed them off. A few weeks later, I heard from Selwyn, who said that my advertisement sheet had somehow managed to slip into the gap at the back of his desk, and he was frantically asking if there was a spare copy that he could purchase. The answer was, no, Selwyn, they're all gone. He wrote back, hopes that someone had failed to pay for their copy and that he could have theirs. I finally wrote back and told him that I had the master printing sheets for the book. And if he wanted me to, I would happily run off a set of photocopies and send him to those in the box. He did, so I did. We agreed that in return, he would send me a relatively old Macmillan edition of either Alice or Looking Glass that still had a cover on it, and hopefully a title page, and not too much Victorian jam, stains, and smudges. After all, he had a car park full of them, and he surely wouldn't miss just one. Wrong. Sometimes later, I had another letter from him thanking me and telling me that he had actually stood in the sanctuary of his church and told the congregation that his prayers had been answered, and he was very, very pleased and happy to have received the photocopies. It sounded like a miracle had happened, but it really hadn't. I had just sent him a photocopy. Still, it was a very interesting and touching gesture for his part. Sadly, the book he sent me in return was stolen in the post. Number 8, Joel Birnbaum likes to tell everybody about the time he phoned me and asked for advice about collecting Carroll. This is when he first started collecting. Based on my early experience in London, I told him he was late. It was too late, since almost everything important and rare had already been collected by millionaires. My response had been based on how difficult it was to find Carroll books in London. Well, I lived there for about a year in the early 1970s. At one point, I had gone to Oxford to the famous Blackwell bookstore. I was sure they would have shelves full of things Carrollian. The man at the counter laughed in my face. He made a sudden move under the counter, and at first I was concerned that he might be reaching for a pistol, but he was actually retrieving a clipboard. This had a long list of names, perhaps 50 or 100, I didn't remember. The clerk told me that if any Carroll associated things like books, pamphlets, photographs, Bob the Bat, etc., came in, they would first mark the price up, of course, then get a hold on the phone and start at the top of the list and offer it to number 1. If number 1 didn't want it, they would offer it to number 2. This would progress until they finally found a buyer. He told me that they would add my name to the bottom of the list, but usually by this time, the only thing that was left was Sylvia and Bruno books. But that is exactly quite pointless, since the item would be sold almost always within 30 minutes. Anyway, when I told Joel, I was incorrect, but not an out-and-out lie. By now, Joel has collected approximately 5 times more Carrollian stuff than I ever did. For a long time, he kept a pair of vicious Doberman pinchers in his house to protect his collection. This was wisdom. Someone from Blackwell might sneak in his house and pinch a few treasures. Number 9. As time went by, I heard about Joel Birnbaum again, from him again. He had a bright idea that we should do a Carrollian parody of Edward St. John Gorey's classic Amphigory. Joel had already written the text, and he wanted me to illustrate it in a gory sort of way if I could mimic it. I was working in Dead Deer, Alberta. Well, actually Red Deer, but that's what I called it at the time, with nothing better to do in the evenings. So I agreed to give it a try. It took me a few months. We contacted Gorey Estate. Sadly, Gorey was dead from heart failure by then. And the original literary estate lawyer flippantly said that would be fine. Their agent sent us a letter of agreement. However, they hadn't realized that I was a world famous Gorey art forger. By this time, they had a new attorney representing the estate. He saw that our parody looked too much like Gorey had come back from the dead and actually done it. And he was concerned that Gorey collectors were so stupid that they would be confused, since they all knew Gorey had passed on in 2000, in spite of having the middle name of St. John to protect him. He, the attorney, not Gorey, who was dead by that time, I already told you that, I immediately withdrew the original worthless agreement and threatened a lawsuit if we ever so much as even thought of publishing our parody. So that was the end of that. Some dreams come true. Others just splat in your face while you were innocent sleeping. I guess I shouldn't have made the drawings look too much like Gorey had done them. My bad. I incorrectly thought that it was intent of the parody. Lesson learned. Alan Tannenbaum now owns the original drawings, in case you ever want to see them. My earphones are trying to fall off. Sorry. Number 10, some of the best Lewis Carroll memories I have are associated with the late Dr. Sandra G. Bursting. One week I was in San Francisco on a Friday. I set out to visit some of San Francisco's famous and much too expensive rare bookstores. Strangely, every bookstore that I visited and asked about Lewis Carroll had the response that they had nothing of any importance because they had a standing offer from a local physician who they always gave first refusal. Evidently, Standard didn't refuse a lot. Frustrated, I finally begged one of them into telling me his name so that I might be able to meet him. He rather reluctantly told me Sanders' name, and I gave him a call, suggesting that we shared an interest in Carroll and perhaps we should meet for coffee or something. He said that his wife, Beth, was visiting her relatives in Houston that weekend. He explained that her relatives owned a small furniture store there. Later, I found out that it was the largest and most important furniture store in Houston at the time, if not in all of Texas. He told me that strangely, he had just had a phone call from her, she told him that she had made the rounds of Houston bookstores looking for Carroll books for him, but had found nothing of interest because there was some guy who lived there named Byron Sewell, who was always coming in and buying everything Carroll, and they had nothing to offer. We both laughed. He agreed that we needed to meet and suggested in the morning. He asked me if I would like to go out on the bay and take a ride under the Golden Gate Bridge in his in-laws' little boat. That sounded great to me. So the next morning, I called a taxi to the dock where the boat was, and he pointed it out. It was a decommissioned military USA Coast Guard cutter that his in-law had bought and renovated with new engines, new techniques, and everything you could want, such as sonar, etc. He had even hired the former skipper to captain the ship. This was not a little boat. I believe that they had removed the military hardware, such as machine guns and whatever else, depth charges, I don't know. We sailed out under the Golden Gate Bridge in style. He became a dear friend to me. Number 11, I finally met Edward Wakeling in 1985 at the Lewisgale Society meeting in Austin, Texas. When I lived in London one year on an assignment, I did not even know him, and even on later short visits to London, we never seemed to be able to arrange a visit. So I never saw his famous Carroll collection. I did see a few photographs of some of the bookcases, however. As is well known, Edward was able to purchase John Davis' major collection and from his estate. Because of the fact that I always sent John Davis copies of my early Carrollian nonsense, Edward picked up probably the largest collection of my own early output. Edward prides himself as having the largest personal collection of Sewelliana, as some collectors refer to it, as if I was actually important, not. I've been told that he has a 4-drawer filing cabinet in his bedroom with just my stuff in it. This is probably just a joke. In any event, he has a lot of it. Most likely in a basement or crawl space where much of it belongs. Number 12. I had the pleasure of meeting Alan and Allison Tannenbaum in their Austin home when the Lewisgale Society fall meeting of 2000 went there. At the front door, I was greeted by the largest of their 3 huge mastiffs. No burglar or in his or her right mind was going to sneak in and pinch some rare Carrollian books in this house. Then when I went to the living room, still alive and in possession of my throat, I saw a magnificent shoulder-mounted American bison, Bubba by name, over their fireplace. I thought instantly of the Mad Gardener's song about a Cape buffalo on the mantelpiece. I was I was escorted to my bedroom with my luggage, where I found a taxidermied alligator, male or female was hard to tell, that looked, in my memory, to be about 10 feet long. But Allison has assured me it was only about 3 feet. Evidently, a bigger alligator had bitten off one of his legs. Then into their den, where their wonderful Carroll collection was kept in bookcases with glass doors, a protection against mastiff slobber, and where I saw a rare, antique, rather risque Alice in Wonderland pinball machine that features in one of my stories, Pinball Alice. Number 13. The preeminent Lewis Carroll collector in Japan is Yoshiyuki Moma, who is speaking tomorrow. For many years, he had worked steadily to create the Japanese bibliography of Carroll. His home is somewhere outside Tokyo in the suburbs, and he works in Tokyo during the week. Unfortunately, I never had been to his home and to meet his family and to view his collection, the best collection in Japan and quite possibly the best in the world. However, I did have the opportunity to visit with him on a weekend in Tokyo when I was on a business trip to Tokyo in association with a project I was working on in the Republic of Korea. My hotel room had panoramic picture views of Tokyo Bay, and in most days I could see Mount Fuji in the distance on the other side of the bay. Since I had the weekend free, I contacted Yoshiyuki, and we met at my hotel on a Saturday morning and spent all day with Carroll in mind and conversation, going to used and new bookstores, a famous Alice in Wonderland themed tea shop, a wonderful Japanese restaurant, and an art museum show about Salvador Dali. You couldn't get within 10 feet of the popular exhibits. It was so packed. Yoshiyuki bought both of us a postcard of Dali's familiar and bizarre Alice dancing with a hula hoop over her head. It's supposed to be hurled on your hips, Alice, as a souvenir. To mark the occasion, let me start there. A short walk away from the hotel where I was staying would take you to a huge abandoned, rusted Disney-style theme park. It was quite eerie. The bay was right behind a thick groves of trees that led down from the theme park to the shore. There were only a few people exploring the place. The body of a man was lying prone on a beach that looked like he might actually be dead. I didn't intervene since I know essentially no Japanese. If he was in trouble, I wasn't going to be any help. You couldn't even call the police. The shore was also largely empty of beachgoers. It seemed odd, since the common idea is that every square meter of Tokyo and environs is very crowded. When I was walking along the beach, I noticed some fast-moving shadows on the sand. Looking up, I saw directly overhead, about 20 feet above, a large flock of silent black geese winging their way toward Mount Fuji. I didn't even know that such geese existed and why they were so silent. My experience with geese is that they honk a lot. I told this to a few Japanese people, and they said they had never seen such birds either. I wound up writing a ghost story involving Alice and this scene about the place, which the Lewisgale Society of Japan kindly eventually published in Mismatch. Finally, number 14, the next time I encountered Andy Malcolm was at another LCSNA meeting, and I went over to say hello and to meet George Walker, who was with him, hoping that they might be interested in publishing the illustrations for The Hunting of the Snark that I had recently finished, and I was searching for a fine press publisher. I could draw a little better by then. I didn't have the images with me, but I said that I would send him photocopies if they might be interested. He startled me by saying, yes, of course, we would like to publish them. I know your work, which I admire. That eventually became the first volume in a Snark trilogy, published by the famous Cheshire Cat Press. Of all my dozens of Carroll books, that is one of my very favorite, and one that I am proudest of. I had long ago given up on the idea that I might one day illustrate a fine press book. So this was literally a dream come true, thanks to George and Andy. And as a bonus, Edward Wakeling provided a wonderful, serious preface. That's the end of my talk.
Well, thanks very much, Byron. We have a little bit of time in between. I wonder if before we invite our next guest speaker, if you could talk a little bit about what draws you so frequently to parody as a mode of engagement with Carroll's work.
Well, the wonderful thing about Alice in Wonderland is that it has a marvelous platform. You can start with Alice in Wonderland, start changing names and places and things, and it's still Alice, but it's perfect for doing parody. And I took advantage of that a lot of times, doing lots of parody. I love doing parody. You give all the credit to Carroll, but you can still be your own twist on it. So some of them have been long, some of them have been short, but it's the perfect thing for anybody who wants to become a Carrollian, is to read the parodies. There's a lot of parodies to be collected from Victorian times, and it's also fun to be able to write one yourself.
Have you sort of uncovered any sort of particular aspects that make it particularly ripe for parody?
Well, a couple of things. The characters are easily identified, even if they have a different name or dress. The scenes are the same, and you can manipulate the scenes to either do sci-fi, or you can do mysteries. You can do all sorts of types of literature in parody, and that's what I've done over the years. I'm not quite sure how many I've done. A lot. And it just fascinates me, and it's also wonderful that Alice in Wonderland is to be found in almost any foreign country. It seems like a lot of the places I've been, I started doing parody because it was so available. We even wrote some texts in English, but got published in foreign languages, like Alicia in the Dreamtime. That was my idea. I did the drawings, did them all, and then didn't look for a publisher. And it turned out it had never been done before, so they did it. And I think some of you may know that one. But also Vicky and my wife, Vicky, and I have done several. For example, we did a parody of Alice in Wonderland written in West Virginia slang, or a dialect, the southeastern United States dialect. We had to write the dialect first because there was no standardized dialect. And I illustrated, and she and I written together. It could become, you might find it interesting. We also did, while we lived in Korea for a year, we had nothing to do on a lot of weekends. We were way down on the southern tip of Korea, not much to do. And we translated Alice in Wonderland into a Korean style. Not a straight translation, but the drawings are all based on early or very old Korean drawings. Anyway, it's the perfect thing if you can, and it isn't just Alice. You can parody all kinds of Lewisgale. There's a lot of snarky and parody. I've done probably more snarky and parody than I have Alice parody. But I just like it. You can start with that wonderful piece of literature, then you just let your mind spin, let it go wherever it wants to go, and you can. And strangely, some of them honestly get published. There's an interest in parody. I don't think they sell very well. And when I first went to the first Lewis Carroll meeting in London, the first time, they were very down on parody. They didn't like parody at all. They were more purist. But when you come to America, they're not quite so stiff about it. And, they're more tolerant.